If I asked you to think of your favorite quest in a video game, chances are good you might not turn straight to a Tomb Raider title. And I get that, this is a term most often associated with MMOs, open world RPGs and the like, but the reality is quests can take many forms. A quest can be a task as simple as collecting a certain number of bananas to open a door in Donkey Kong 64. It can be a mission as complex as formulating a plan to eliminate a constantly moving target in Hitman. Maybe it's even an objective as cartoonishly entertaining as figuring out how to prevent this bulldozer from plunging to its demise in Polybridge. But whatever term you prefer to use, quest construction is often at the forefront of game design. And I'll be the first to admit that the recipes most frequently being used here can become a bit stale. And that's where Tomb Raider comes in. Specifically, the excellent second game in the modern trilogy reboot, Rise of the Tomb Raider. And more specifically, its thoughtfully crafted adventure-concluding level, the Lost City of Kitezh. When you first enter Kitezh, you're treated to a wide vista framing the majority of the city. It's an impressive scene that juxtaposes the awe-inspiring views with the moody and somber aesthetic. The Lost City is an area that feels both large in scale, but also manageable from a traversal standpoint, and it's easy to get excited about the possibilities of exploring it while you look down upon its many abandoned buildings. There's a lot to love about the design of this level, from the way you get around, to the intelligent implementation of its collectibles, to the many opportunities you have for combat engagements. But I want to specifically talk about the main objective you're faced with, and how it's built in a way that breaks free from the mold of traditional design techniques. It's true there's a lot to see here, but your only actual goal is to pass through the gate on the north side of the level in order to continue to make your way to your ultimate destination, the Chamber of Souls, wisely highlighted with a distinct orange glow from its windows. But of course, in true video game fashion, you can't just immediately get through the gate, you have to destroy the gate. And you learn this fact when enemies start launching fireballs at you with a trebuchet from the complete opposite side of the map. So in order to proceed, you need to traverse across this entire area, climb your way up to the trebuchet, hijack it from the enemies who are trying to use it against you, and instead use it for yourself to launch a fiery projectile at the gate, crumbling it to pieces. At first glance, this might seem like a variation of the tried and true A to B and back to A quest formula found in so many other games, and that's because it is. But despite following that familiar pattern, Rise of the Tomb Raider tweaks and disguises it so well that it ends up feeling like something entirely different. That's the key here, because there's nothing inherently wrong with traditional formulas for mission building, they're just basic recipes. The trouble developers run into is when they fall victim to one of the many snags that can bog down these types of quests. Most notably, these include using this template too many times throughout the course of the game, failing to introduce variety into the quest line, making traveling between destinations a chore, needlessly interrupting the story or gameplay flow, and finally, not making a lick of goddamn sense. And the remarkable thing about this sequence in Rise of the Tomb Raider is that it manages to overcome every single one of these obstacles. The format used for this questline gets used exactly once in this area, and once more in the following area. And as we'll see in a minute, it's more complex and more varied the second time around. The formula certainly gets used in other areas of the game leading up to this, but because it's so well paced overall, and because the opportunities to implement this kind of gameplay are limited by the small number of open world areas, it never feels like the developers are leaning on this structure in order to pad the content or prolong the time spent playing. In fact, I don't think this was a concern at all, as this entire area of the game is deliberately designed to create a very swift and almost economical experience for the player, if they choose. More on that later. One of the other reasons this part of the game doesn't feel overly familiar, even though it's near the end of your playtime, is because Crystal Dynamics introduces a new mechanic that you've never used throughout the entire course of the game until this point. These trebuchets don't make an appearance anywhere else in the game, which is awesome, because it shows the developers weren't satisfied with simply recycling mechanics found in older levels, and instead built a whole new thing you get to play around with literally for just the last portion of the game. So that's a big check on the don't overuse the same formula box. Introducing the trebuchet set pieces is important here because there may be nothing wrong with repeating a quest template as long as it feels different each time you have to do it. And Rise of the Tomb Raider provides a fantastic example of how to do this by injecting progressive variety into the formula used here, not just in relation to the rest of the game, but even within this single level itself. Here's what I mean. So when I refer to progressive variety, I'm not talking about systems of progression like stat levels or skill trees. I'm talking about the ways developers take a basic formula and consistently introduce new mechanics, obstacles, and encounters to it across the course of the game or level. Rise of the Tomb Raider does exactly this. The first time you go gate busting with the trebuchet, it's simply the introductory version of the quest. You go to point A, you realize you can't progress, so you go to point B to activate the thing you need to progress, then you go back to point A to continue on. You're then provided with an intense combat arena to appropriately break up the pacing of the area before reaching gate number 2. So at this point you already know what you need to do. It's the same quest line, but this time it's not as simple. This time you need to leave the gate to find another trebuchet, solve a puzzle to unjam it, aim and fire it at the gate, realize you're going to need more than one hit to take it down, eliminate some enemies who are harassing you, make your way to another trebuchet, solve a crazy puzzle involving manipulating levers and buckets of water to smash the ice that's blocking this one, get attacked again but this time use the trebuchet itself to absolutely dunk on your foes, then finally aim it towards the gate and fire away. The developers took the trebuchet sequence they taught you in the first half of Katesh and basically made another whole level out of this single mechanic, this time weaving in high-flying traversal, spur-of-the-moment combat engagements, and clever puzzle solving, all of which have been key elements throughout the entire game. So the first time you're met with this objective, it's simple and straightforward. The second time adds some basic puzzle solving, and by the third time it's grown into something much more complex. All 3 instances are based on the exact same goal, but because there are new elements that organically build upon one another, it never feels the same. And I have no doubt if they had wanted this level to be longer, the developers could have continued this progression of variety even further with similar sequences. Another barrier, another checkmark. Okay, but one of the problems sometimes created with making more complex permutations of the same sequence is that it makes for a lot of travel time between objectives. Point A to B to A may be fine, but point A to B to C and back to A with a whole bunch of other stuff thrown in between, won't that get tiring? Not in Rise of the Tomb Raider. Unlike other games that have you endlessly running, riding, sailing, flying, or whatever to get you across their vast worlds, Rise of the Tomb Raider makes use of its excellent traversal system and contained level design to make for fast, fun, and flowing travel. You'll quickly make your way from objective to objective using zip lines, grappling hooks, and good old run and jumps, practically feeling the wind blow through your hair as you do so. Like, check this out. I clocked the amount of time it took for me to get back to the first gate after destroying it, and it ended up being just 40 seconds. And to be honest with you, that number surprised me, because the experience was so fluid it felt like about half that time. The path back to the second gate takes a little longer, but is just as smooth, even with the enemies that get in your way as you make your way across. And this time you even get to create your own zip lines, adding to the level of interaction between the player and the level. The other obvious point to mention here is that by this stage in the game, you've become very familiar with all of these platforming mechanics. You're a professional Tomb Raider, and the levels now just become a playground for you to show off your stuff. It's an excellent culmination to showcase all of the skills you've gained throughout your playthrough. So we end up with a level that's intricately balanced, allowing the player to travel freely, but also respecting their time as they approach the endgame. Check, check, and check. Another stumbling block developers run into is forcing content onto the player at a point where they don't want their flow to be interrupted. In the sequences directly leading up to finding the Lost City, you'll encounter Tomb Raider's trademark platforming blended in with some of its cinematic set pieces, along with a few tense combat sections. It's also at a point in the story where everything is barreling towards the finale. Things are clearly ramping up, and the developers are using this series of events to build tension and create excitement, and then you're met with another open area to explore. But what if I want that sense of urgency to continue? What if I'm already prepared for the game to keep moving forward? Well, Crystal Dynamics lets you do that. Finding a way through the gates is the only piece of content you need to complete in order to keep progressing through this part of the game. There's other content present. There's enemies patrolling the streets you can fight, there's an optional collection challenge that spans the entire city, there's items you can find to improve your character, and of course there's one of the game's excellent namesake tombs you can explore and solve. There's plenty to do here, but you don't have to do any of it. In fact, you could complete the entire first half of this world in less than 10 minutes if you want to. Think about that. This is a fully fleshed out, brand new level that's introduced at the very end of the game that the developers clearly put a lot of time and effort into, and they still had the awareness to say to the player, it's there if you want it. They don't delay the urgency of the story, they don't interrupt your flow, and in fact, arguably improve upon it, and they don't force you to complete several quests at a point in the game where so much tension has already been built. Crystal Dynamics gets a lot of respect from me for implementing that kind of design. Check. Okay, so how many times have you had to complete a mission in a game where some random character is like, yeah, I actually do know the location of your next objective, but I can't tell you that until you go to the local graveyard and collect 3 headstones, because my nephew loves creepy artifacts and I need to repair my relationship with you. I'd do it myself, but 6 years ago I was cursed by a witch with an affliction that prevents me from even thinking about stepping foot in another graveyard. Get those for me and only then will I agree to your request, but in order to do so, I need you to head to the river on the other side of the mountain to go fishing for 10 rainbow trout, which I'll then use to concoct a truth serum in my lab that I need you to unlock, by the way, because I seem to have lost my keys. And then I'll use the truth serum on myself, thus forcing me to inform you of the location you seek. And you were like, bro, can't you just tell me while I'm here? Or... One thing I really appreciate about this sequence in Rise of the Tomb Raider is that it's actually reasonable within the context of your character's situation. I mean, it's still a video game where you're fighting an undying army of monster soldiers and shooting them out of the air as they carelessly zipline down centuries-old pieces of rope, but in the context of that, the mission still makes sense. There's not a dozen nonsensical items you need to collect, there's not a character withholding information for no reason, there's not some outlandish, over-the-top plan that takes 2 hours to complete. There's just a physical object in the world you need to get through, and a physical object in the world you can use to do it. This is really refreshing. And while there's surely other parts of the game that fall victim to some of this illogical quest design, this isn't one of them. And for that, Tomb Raider receives its final check. Let's be clear that while this is a great example of level design, it doesn't mean that this formula can or should be applied to every game. It's just not realistic. The current approach to designing open world games by providing a ton of stuff to do all but requires developers to fall back on some of the more basic filler quests. Live service games that promise new content to players on a regular basis also run into this problem. It would be foolish to believe that each mission in those types of games could be as detailed and well thought out as the sequence of events we see in Tomb Raider. And that's one of the benefits of choosing the hybrid, semi-open world design that this trilogy implements so well. And listen, sometimes basic mission design is okay. I don't mind monster slaying quests in The Witcher 3 because your character is literally a hired monster slayer. You kind of signed up for some of that. I don't mind collection quests in Stardew Valley because collecting more things is what the whole fabric of that game is built on. But when these segments get used over and over again, when they disrupt the flow of the experience, and when they're just so clearly nonsensical filler, that's when they start to get irritating. Fortunately for us, the lost city of Kitesh does none of those things. It's an enjoyable and engaging moment that caps off a fantastic game, and it utilizes self-aware mission design that respects the player's time and keeps the decision-making in their hands. Its blend of linear objectives that are dropped into a sprawling but manageable open level are the peak of what the Tomb Raider trilogy does best. And if for some reason you still haven't checked this one out, I'd highly recommend giving it a shot. And if you want to learn more about the design of this game, I'd be happy to tell you, but first I'm going to need you to scale the snow-covered peaks beyond this village. I'd do it myself, but I have to. So this video was originally intended to be part of my continuing series on level design, where I dive deep into specific outstanding levels like Phendrana Drifts from Metroid Prime. But when the script shifted to instead highlight Katesh's excellent quest design and flow, that resulted in a lot of content being left out, and trust me, there's plenty more to discuss here. So if you're interested in seeing that part of the video get made, or want to see more content that features exceptional level design, do me a favor and like this video, subscribe if you're really into this stuff, and leave me a comment letting me know what level or area of a game you'd like to see me explore next.